Hello, welcome to another Monsterama Junior. That's Monsterama 2022 panel. This is Kyle Mitchell. I am the second director of virtual programming this year. And welcome to our Evolution of Cinema Vampire panel. We've got a great crew of light here to talk about the many different vampires we've seen on screen over the years. And so I will ask them to introduce themselves to you and tell them a little bit about themselves. And why don't we start with Mike?
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write horror, urban fantasy, and science fiction, including a series of vampire novels about a curmudgeonly gay vampire and his dog and their nosy neighbors and their homeowners associations called the Withrow Chronicles. And I also co-host a podcast called Arcane Carolinas about myths, legends, and lore from the North and South Carolina, but also sometimes from other places.
I don't know about our other Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's fine. I just I don't know which way to go with that either. There's just so many mics. It's cool. Howdy everyone. My name's Mike Gordon. I am a writer, comic publisher, indie. My book Tiki Zombie just celebrated its 10-year anniversary, or Tiki-versary as we like to say, last year. I also am the co-host of a podcast that's been going on for about 12 years now, Earth Station 1, and I get involved in other stuff too, but that's the main thing that keeps me busy.
Right, and Lev?
I am Leverett Butts. I didn't actually start out writing horror. Mainly I wrote a series of Westerns retelling King Arthur called Guns of the Wasteland. But recently I've started writing a bunch of Dracula-related stories with Dacre Stoker, the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. And we've written a Sherlock Holmes crossover with Dracula. We've written stories for Classic Monsters Unleashed and with Dracula Unfanged, retelling different aspects of Dracula or Vlad the Impaler. And we're currently working on a novel that will talk about Bram Stoker's writing of Dracula along with an appearance by Dracula.
Spoilers.
Nice. I love it. And I'm Kyle Mitchell. I'm a poet and longtime Atlanta Con goer, proud member of the Dead Pirates of Sci-Fi fandom that help run con suites and green rooms around Atlanta's cons and so forth. And yeah, happy to be here today moderating this panel. I've respected these guys here and a couple of other panelists that unfortunately have been under the weather and unable to make it as well for years, and so I'm sure this is going to be a lot of fun. I think I wanted to start first by just like they say, everybody has their own doctor, Doctor which Doctor Who you love, whatever. So what's your vampire? Who's your maybe where that you first kind of got hooked into vampire fiction or lore or whatnot, or just your favorite?
Wow, that's I mean, is there like anyone besides like Dracula that I mean that's Vampire 101, right? I mean I think there's probably people who start with other characters. Now, which Dracula, that's like a Doctor Who question. For sure. But yeah, I mean, for me it was, I don't even remember. I mean, as long as I've been alive, I think I've been interested in, it feels like I've been interested in vampires, and particularly Dracula. Although when I got the topic for this cinematic vampires, I was like, okay, let's try to make a list of vampires that are not Dracula. Wow, that's tough.
Barnabas Collins actually was my, before even Dracula. I had read Dracula, but I'd never seen any of the Dracula movies. Well, no, my older brother used to scare me by making me watch Christopher Lee's Dracula back in when I was a little bitty kid. But I'd read Dracula, but my first cinematic vampire that just kind of stuck with me was Barnabas Collins, Jonathan Frid's Barnabas Collins. But especially the Barnabas Collins that's in the movie. I can't remember which one is first, the Night of Dark Shadows or the House of Dark Shadows, but whichever one dealt with Barnabas and not Quentin, because he was scary as crap in that movie. He was never really scary in the show, but in that movie, he creeped me the hell out.
I'm with you on that. Actually, that was going to be my answer. Is the show Dark Shadows was that was my kind of first memorable, and I loved just the kind of slow burn, getting uncovering that, and for me, of course, Dracula 2 and all the iterations, most of the iterations, but yeah, Dark Shadows was for me kind of the first. Michael?
Oh, I mean, like, so I don't know, I was 11 or 12, so 6th or 7th grade. There was a book fair at school one day, and I was like the kid who loved book fair but never actually remembered that it was happening. So I would never actually have money in my pocket on book fair day. But that time, I just happened to have like $2 in my pocket, and I bought a paperback copy of Dracula at like probably the last book fair that I went to. Anyway, read it and immediately loved it. It was the first horror novel that I had read and just made a huge impression on me. Could not overestimate like the way that affected my brain. So that was my first vampire, but I think actually, all told, my favorites are either the little girl from Let the Right One In, because that is a terrifying vampire movie, or maybe Lestat, because he just does such a good job of embodying the mean queen. I love that. He is just mean and petty and gorgeous. He is the house cat of vampires, and everybody loves him, and everybody knows that he would kill them in an instant. I don't know, something about that works for me.
And Tom Cruise surprisingly did a good job. I had my doubts when that movie came out, but when it was over, I was like, all right, Tom Cruise, like him or hate him, he can do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anne Rice had her she didn't think it was going to pan out too.
Yeah. And then when she saw Rough Cuts, she came out with a public statement and said, I was wrong. This guy gets it. I think that there's, well, I'm going to not launch into me getting on a soapbox. Suffice to say, it's an excellent adaptation.
You mean a box of Earth, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Actually, I was thinking big screen when you asked me, but small screen, I think the first vampire I ever was introduced to was the Count. So I blame Sesame Street for my fascination with vampires.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm on that train.
I was actually just doing that here at Darren's house. I was going, 1 Jack Russell Terrier, 2 Jack Russell Terrier.
My favorite meme actually popped up just before this panel, and it's somebody says, who's your favorite literary vampire? And someone says, the one from Sesame Street. That one doesn't count. I assure you he does.
That's awesome.
That's great. I'd buy that t-shirt for sure. Well, so yeah, there's been so many versions of vampires on film, but I guess if we start back in black and white and Nosferatu and so forth, as I see, there's a new Nosferatu that's going to be made by Robert Eggers, I think it is, with Bill Skarsgård actually playing him coming out, right? So did any of y'all love the originals and as much as your favorite?
I just watched it last night. I watched the 100-year-old movie last night. We're getting ready to celebrate its 100th year on the podcast next week, and so I rewatched it. I've seen it a number of times, and every time I watch it, it's better and better, or at least it impresses me more and more. Because yeah, I have looked to see if there were vampire stories before that were filmed before Nosferatu, and I think there's a couple, but they're lost to time.
Yeah.
So Count Orlok has gotten rid of all his competition and he wins. But it is interesting how the first vampire really that we see on the big screen, that stars on the big screen, is also Dracula, but then is not, because he's so, he's so freakish in nature, and visually, he's sort of demonic looking, not at all what we would later associate vampires with these like sexy guys coming in, and women too, that are just so erotic. Orlok is not about that at all.
And I love that in Salem's Lot, in the original Salem's Lot movie, they made Barlow look like Count Orlok,
Yeah,
which I thought was an interesting change, because that's not how he is in the book, but it works.
totally. And in the same vein of, no pun intended, of wow, that really was not intentional. But
No, I intend the pun. We love that.
okay, but of like fiction about the making of something, in the same sense as like Kieran Dacre's novel about the making of the novel. I love Shadow of the Vampire as a way to take the idea of making Nosferatu and turn that into its own vampire story. I watched the original Bela Lugosi Dracula at a local art house movie theater just a year or two ago. I don't remember. I guess time is different. Maybe it was like 3 years ago. But anyway, bottom line being, I had seen it before. I'd seen it, after I read the book as a kid. That was like one of the first video rentals when my community got a video rental store. But I don't know. I watched it at some point around then anyway. But it struck me as an adult watching it how funny of a movie it is, and how much of the movie is about the characters realizing that this weird dude who calls himself Count Dracula is this incredible throwback. And they really like capture that part of the book. And it really stuck me that like the look, the classic vampire look of the formal coat and the vest and the bow tie and the opera cape is in that movie played as a joke. Because like they show him in that outfit, and then the very next scene is Mina and Lucy laughing about how ridiculous he looked. And I love that in that movie. I love how aware that movie is of the time in which it was made, and like the cultural transitions that had happened between the book and the movie happening.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And so what do you think about the evolution? That this panel started off really because it was we had the 100th anniversary of Nosferatu, and then we were thinking, oh, we should talk about all vampires and even more. So what do y'all think about the evolution of vampires on film?
I
They
like how
reflect
they're.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Michael.
I was just about to say they reflect the times, which is I found like when I was making the list of vampire movies that I've seen that I like, especially whether it's Dracula or other characters. I look at them like, I wasn't around for the 30s and 40s and even 50s, so that's kind of vague for me. But certainly the 70s, 80s, 90s, and up till now, it's interesting how the vampires are really reflective of those time periods. And the type of vampire movies that we get are very similar. Like all the ones in the 80s have this sort of camp humor, sexy theme to them, whereas the ones in the 90s kind of like just go the opposite way. Like they're very cyclical in that way.
I was going to say, I like how it looks like we're cycling back towards the vampire as monstrous.
Mm-hmm.
For a while there was the vampire as a sympathetic character, and that can be done well, but I was getting kind of tired of the vampire being secretly the good guy.
I think that also, like, kind of like zombies, they are representative of their time.
Mhm.
And like zombie movies, sort of shift in what their flavor is to reflect the anxieties of the era in which they're made. But vampires are unique in that almost every other monster movie is something that we're afraid would happen to us. And vampires uniquely are the thing that we kind of hope happens to us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is a vampire movie ever just about vampires? Like, it seems like it's almost always about something else, right? So many different themes that it can play with. I think zombie movies are kind of like that too, but really, if you look at most of the other sort of universal monsters, yeah, they've all got different themes to them, but I think the vampire is really more adaptable, let's say, and depending on the situation can mean, you know, a lot of different things. So it really opens it up to be able to use the vampires, and there's different kinds, of course, which we can talk about. But
Right, yeah, but you're right. Like, you look at Dracula and the symbolism there, and you know, you're right. Most films in their era represent some of what is this a metaphor for? And and I love how, like, you're talking about Lestat and how Anne Rice evolved just that character through the novels, and when he's living in the 80s as a rock star or whatever, right? And dealing with AIDS, you know, the AIDS epidemic as a vampire, and you know, things like that. I thought it was just very clever.
They're just sort of this like rubber band ball of all the right things to persist in the imagination. They're kind of hot, they're kind of scary, they're a little bit about sex, they're a little bit about the things about sex that we're afraid of, they're a little bit about bodies, they're a little bit about charisma, and in a very like sort of aphysical way, you know. They're about our own desire to live forever, they're about our own fear that we won't, you know. And there's a lot about them. I mean, they're basically the only monster that's about gaining more control and more agency in some ways than losing it. Every other kind of monster is about losing control of yourself. Vampires are a little bit about that, but they're also about gaining power. And I think that they just really wrap up like all the right things, so that in every era, somebody's able to look at that and find some part of it that they're able to use to talk about their time.
You know, speaking of Lestat, I really I actually like all of the Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. You know, I know a lot of folks are like, oh, after Queen of the Damned, I stopped, or I only like, but I have to say my favorite interpretation of Lestat, I guess, is in the first one. You know, I didn't enjoy as much the more Lestat became sympathetic. Like, I enjoyed him as a character, but I didn't really enjoy, you know, him kind of being aware of his own shtick.
mm-hmm.
You know, when he calls himself the Dark Prince or the Brat Prince, I was like, all right, yeah. But I really love him in Interview with the Vampire, because he's both sympathetic and creepy. You know, you're both drawn towards and repelled by him. As y'all were saying, we are by vampires, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's just trying to be a good role model.
Yeah.
Every dad struggles. Every dad struggles, you know.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, in the books, I mean, it's a lot different. Louis' version, or Louis', you know, angle on him, and the way he sees Lestat is a lot different than Lestat sees himself, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what drew me in to the Anne Rice books. And I think, like you guys said, I think the first movie did a pretty good job, much better than I thought it would do. I mean, yeah. that book, as far as vampire stories goes, that book really introduced me in a literary way to vampires. I only read Dracula afterwards, and boy, that really blew me away. Yeah, because if you read those stories and maybe even watch those stories when you were a teenager, man, they really can hit home in some places. And then watching or reading those same stories as an adult takes on a completely different meaning.
Oh yeah. I recently went all the way through the Anne Rice, because yeah, I have a 2-hour drive to work, so I do a lot of audio books, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to listen to all the Anne Rice books, and they definitely hit different as an adult as opposed to a teenager or 20-year-old.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that as a kid, we experience vampires as like, isn't that cool? That would be fun. You'd be young forever. Like that's the appealing side of it. And you get to be hot forever, and and it would happen to you while you're still hot, And then as an adult now, for me, very much vampire stories I tend to view through the lens of somebody who is going to age forever, somebody who will just watch the world that they understood peel away, one technology and clothing style and dead friend and family that they can no longer keep up with because their 17th great grandchildren are number in the 100,000s.
Yeah.
And so all the things that they thought that they were becoming a vampire for are gone. And that's a really depressing and weird and stark kind of horror. And I think that we only really get the opportunity to view that, and I do see it as an opportunity, as older people ourselves.
You gave me an idea. I was like, that would be a cool vampire story. Somebody that thinks they're going to be young forever, and they're telling the story like 400 or 500 years later, and there's like, when I first started, I looked like Kiefer Sutherland, and now I look like Willem Dafoe. Because
Yeah.
You just age slower than normal, right? I think that's what one of my favorite movies, vampire movies of all time, it kind of addresses that a little bit, is The Hunger.
Yeah.
You have this contrast with Miriam and man, I can't remember David Bowie's name, the character name, but anyway, the fact that he ages and she doesn't, and all her companions age and she doesn't, and she's going through that cycle, and you get to see it from really both perspectives, and as well as a new person coming in, and it's sexy as hell, stylized as hell. Like that movie really is one of my favorite vampire movies.
I'm on my phone right now looking it up on IMDb. I have not seen that one.
Oh my God, you have to watch it. The first 5 minutes of it are the best 5 minutes of any vampire movie ever made.
Wow.
You have to watch it.
Added to my watch list. I did just now.
Good deal. Like I think that especially that when the horror is so subtle and it is only really appreciable by older people in some ways, because she offers the good kind of immortality, but what she actually confers is like the worst kind of immortality, and she herself is the only person who gets to enjoy that. And like, I think you could watch that as an 80s movie and see it as an example of trickle-down economics. And you can watch it as a movie now and see it as, I don't know, what it's like living in the era of super rich people trying to buy Twitter. And so, it's a really, really fascinating take on the way that nobody is ever really satisfied, even by getting what they want.
It's so much, it is a different experience from when I first watched it in the 80s. I didn't see it in the theater, but on cable. And it just was, it was all sexy and young, and it was really cool. Look at David Bowie was in it and all that kind of stuff. And now when I watch it, I'm thinking of a lot of different things and putting myself more in David Bowie's shoes, like he's getting older, it's also, in my opinion, so frequently we hear people say, well, the movie's all right, but it's not as good as the book or whatever, right? The Hunger is like the exception to that, I think. I know that Whitley Strieber did the first book, and then he did, I think, a series of other books about Miriam Blaylock as well. But that first one was just a tough go through for me. I didn't really appreciate the book, but the movie is amazing.
Another vampire movie that I love is Near Dark.
Yes.
With Bill Paxton and Lance Henriksen.
And another one that it's about
the ending, but everything else was fantastic. No, I was just saying, I didn't really like the ending, but everything else was fantastic.
Big agree about every part of that sentence. And that's another movie about the cost of living forever, and culturally, about like, these are people who are out of time, but not out of time in the sense of their time has ended, but in the sense that the time that they are from is long gone. The world that they occupied when they became vampires does not exist anymore, and they will never understand this world. They can get by in it, but like their approach to this world is as if they have never heard of living in society.
With the saturation of just so much in this genre, you see you have to get really creative if you're going to try and tell kind of a new original take on the vampire story, right? Is there any particular favorites of yours? I know we've got The Invitation out now. I think that's probably the newest vampire movie. That's kind of a continuation, if you will, of Dracula. What If, kind of stuff. So that's one way you can go. But there's any other favorites of yours like you have, right? That creative takes on perspective of telling the vampire story.
My favorite recent one, 2015, is A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. That is an amazing take. It's a foreign film, so it's a completely different perspective about this girl Sheila Van, and it's creepy too. I think it's black and white. If it's not, it's like really monotone, like really like the color. But it's a really, really great take on, you're right. It's hard to come up with a new concept or a new angle on vampires. And I think that one is one of my favorites over the last decade, for sure.
I haven't seen that one. I've wanted to see it. And I agree. I think my favorite vampire movie is Let the Right One In. And the American version was okay, but the foreign film version is much better. And and how you instead of it being very obvious this is a vampire movie, and how it kind of unravels through the character building and stuff. I really like. And you're just we're looking at Interview with a Vampire, and what if you're turned into a vampire when you're very, very young, and you can cut off your locks and they grow right back, and you just never inside you're an adult. And there's a lot that's in the novel that didn't get into the movie version for obvious reasons, but with that dilemma. But it's very strange. Like it just made me think of that. It's like The Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. She's a young girl. Let the Right One In, Let Me In, that's a young girl. Transfiguration is about a young boy who gets vampiric powers, it turns into, it's like, it's weird. It's like there's a lot of the innovative ones that have come over in the last like decade or so have been about kids becoming vampires and what that means, that is a really interesting take. I don't know if that's inspired by Anne Rice because of Claudia, or just the times that we're in. And I remember correctly too that Let the Right One In is not even like a little girl. It's a eunuch, right? Wasn't it a boy that was castrated? And am I misremembering that?
That's explored in the book.
It's that genre of child vampires is a nice blend, though, I think, of the vampire movie and the creepy kid movie. Is The Omen, and God, what are the other creepy, like there used to just be a crap ton of just creepy kid movies. I'm teaching a class right now on Pet Cemetery. I'm teaching a class on the dark romantics and how they kind of prefigure American horror. And we recently did The Scarlet Letter, and everybody was like, oh yeah, Pearl is the first creepy kid. That's like, amazing. You're absolutely right. Pearl is the first creepy kid.
Love it. Wow.
What's the Henry James novel that has creepy kids in it?
Screw?
Yeah, doesn't that have the creepy kids in it too? That's a good one.
Yeah, that has creepy kids, and they're the ones that aren't ghosts.
Yeah, right.
Oftentimes humans are actually scarier than the undead or
it gets though that kids are actually creepy. Like kids are creepy. Kids are like these tiny little people who like ask weird questions and have weird ideas and say stuff that you have no idea where it came from, and like make up weird games that are grim, just like grim beyond imagining. And the internet, I do not have children, thank God. And but like the internet is just chock full of people who are just too eager to relate the stories of the time that their kid creeped them out. Just like not a little bit, like creep them the hell out.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think most
And-
parents probably have had that Paranormal Activity moment where the kid is just standing by their bed, like staring
Yeah.
at them as they sleep. Like, what the heck are you doing?
The closest I got was nephews, and I had that. You know,
My kid sister used to do that. I'd wake up. She's much younger than I am, about 10 years. And I would wake up in the middle of the night. She'd just be standing over me, just staring at me. It's like, no, we're done.
And Michael, to your earlier point, I mean, I know it's a bit on the nose, but I mean, what's more of a reminder of youth than a kid, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's like right in your face about like, hey, you want to stay young forever. I mean, it's really like Lost Boys, but even more so, right?
yes. Lost Boys being another great example. Oh my
Oh
God.
yeah.
Like I think a lot of these, especially Lost Boys, kind of speaks to like misspent youth. The idea, like the horror, the horrifying idea of youth that is gone from us and cannot be recaptured. And now somebody is wasting it by doing bad things, you know, or doing things that we never would have done, or wasting it by getting to have more fun than we would have had. And I think that that's a lot of what Lost Boys is about. It's like kids are creepy, teenagers are kind of scary, and also we kind of wish we were teenagers again.
Well, and a little bit of the Fagin, Oliver Twist kind of stuff going on there in Lost Boys too, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
if you use that kind of analogy, I mean, he's almost like a drug dealer, and his, you know, his people he's brought under his wing, and you know, that kind of thing. Another kind of example of how you can use the vampire motifs and stuff to be able to
Oh
make
yeah.
a point socially.
And made at a time when the idea of cults and specifically the interaction of cults with children or with impressionable youth, quote unquote, was very front of mind for a lot of people.
And single parent families, he's trying to get them a mother.
Yeah. It wouldn't shock me to find out, this is a very dated pop culture reference, but it wouldn't shock me to find out if Dan Quayle thought the world of this movie.
I never caught the connection to them wanting to find a mother and the Peter Pan story,
Oh yeah.
where Peter Pan
Yeah.
is trying to get Wendy to be the Lost
Yeah.
Boy's mother.
Yep.
Never until you said that did I make that connection.
That's good. Yeah.
It's literally never occurred to me until you said it just now. That's
Oh wow.
that's
Well, me
amazing.
neither. That's brilliant. See,
I think-
you
I
gotta
think
come to
because-
Monsterama, you learn so much.
I think because when the movie came out, was that 87 or so, right? I was actually in a production of Peter Pan. So I was like playing a pirate. So I was like, it was really on my, like, it was really in my face about Lost Boys. Like, okay, yeah, I got it. But that's a really good, and man, I mean, I think what's a cool vampire movie if it doesn't have a cool soundtrack, right?
Yeah.
Still
I mean,
one of
you
the
can't-
best.
You can't hear the songs in that without thinking of the Lost Boys. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm reading, I don't know if y'all are doing, I'm reading Dracula Daily right now, the emails that Matt Kirkland does,
Yes.
and experiencing the novel Dracula, but in chronological order of all the different letters and, you know, types of correspondence and stuff, statements. And I'm really enjoying that. And I'm curious what y'all think about that. Again, a change of perspective on how you literally like the formatting of that for your vampire story in vampire movies, or what you would want to see if there's maybe something you haven't seen before that now we have this opportunity to kind of put it on its head.
The one of the reasons why Dracula is my favorite book of all time, and I've reread it a few times, is the imagery, the characters. but also just the layout, the way it's comprised of all these different journal entries, and it's like a scrapbook of all this stuff that forms a coherent story, and it's very seamless. And unfortunately, in a cinematic environment, like that's almost, well, no one's really ever really tried it, because I think it's really difficult, like to give that, a lot of different perspectives on the same story in the same time. I don't know if a movie's been able to do that. Certainly, I don't even think any of the adaptations of Dracula have even tried.
Although Coppola's attempted it a little bit, I think. Because they have the scenes of Jack Seward recording into the old-timey record player, but yeah, I don't other than doing that, literally showing Jonathan Harker writing and having the voiceover, I don't know how you could do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'd have to use like different media. Like, I mean, today you could use streaming, TikTok, like YouTube, like you could put out together like all of this media into like form a coherent story, but that would be an effort. And I don't know if it would, I mean, it would take the right person, the right visionary to make it work, but nobody's ever tried to sort of apply that. But I mean, we've still gotten some really, really amazing and quite different adaptations of Dracula over the years.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's one of the things I love about Dracula Daily is that it's just clever to take a novel that is, like probably 2/3 of it is letters between people, and the rest of it being diary entries. But so much of the novel is letters and telegrams, and to turn that into a letter that people receive, it's just, I don't know, it's a clever little idea.
Me too. I'm really loving it, and I'm loving that the fans are catching things that he missed. Like, oh, there were actually one or two other entries that were on that date, and giving feedback so he can then send out corrections and stuff like that. I just love how the fandom interacts like that with it in our modern day form of communication.
That's the true test of a classic, right? It keeps on giving. It keeps on giving, right? That book is yeah, is indestructible in my opinion.
And so one of the classic vampire stories too is Carmilla, and I'd love to hear y'all talk a little bit about the female vampire as either the main villain, heroine, whatnot, in stories, or just that the female vampires in movies.
The first, as far as I could tell, the first adaptation of Carmilla is a movie called Vampire with a PYR, and it's 1934, so it's a little bit after the Bela Lugosi Dracula, and it's an interesting story, but there are many different like films about Carmilla. There's not nearly as many as say Dracula, but there's quite a few. But I find that a lot of them are just like sort of just like eroticism, like cheap erotic, like lore. Like they don't really dive into it that much. I do enjoy the Karnstein trilogy by Hammer Horror that came out in the 70s. Like there's 3 movies there, starting with the Vampire Lovers. I do like that one a lot, but I've been really disappointed. If I see Carmilla, associated with the movie, I get kind of excited. Like, were they going to do it right this time? And almost always they just, it's more exploitive than it is really a great adaptation.
I agree. I enjoyed Carmilla. I had to read it because the student was writing his final paper on it, and I never read it before. And so I've read it like within the last couple of years. And I really enjoyed it. And it's not like those titillating aspects aren't in the book.
Right.
That's what gets that's all that gets translated onto screen. Now, my favorite female vampire is Drusilla from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Drusilla is my absolute. Drusilla and Spike together can you find a better vampire couple?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure about. I'd have to think about that one. But yeah, they're right up there.
Well, and how about the Buffy the Vampire movie? Christy Swanson and
Yeah.
and Paul Rubens, even, right?
Yeah.
Who knew? Who knew that would become like, I didn't even see the movie because it just didn't look appealing to me, but I watched the first episode of the show and I was hooked. And that was a very that's very influential, of course.
I think actually maybe my favorite vampire from the entire show is Harm, who's in it for like 4 seconds. But what a great character. What a great like twist on a character that we hadn't seen in a couple of seasons. And what a great way of just saying, like, what if Mean Girls were a vampire movie?
Yeah. and then of course she just becomes, she's a vampire, and by the time she flips over to the angel show, she's just so bored because she's still just a secretary.
Yeah.
And since she's immortal, this is just what she'll be.
And Drusilla is a great example of the way that the vampire can be frightening because they can be a symbol of liberation. Drusilla is somebody who has, she's presented as somebody who has like totally lost her way mentally, but in reality, she has been empowered to become whatever she wants to be. That is like ultimate liberation, and we find it terrifying. I think that says a lot about us.
What scared me the most about Drusilla was when you get her backstory and you realize it's not being a vampire that drove her crazy. She was crazy before. It was being alive that drove Drusilla crazy. Vampirism just didn't fix it.
What does vampirism fix?
My daily skincare routine.
Yeah. You know,
Good
having to
answer.
find a new retinol serum that works with your skin as it changes. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. It probably fixes hairlines.
Right. I'm looking for that too. If you didn't know.
Well, I think the most impressive thing is that you have no idea what you look like, so you don't care. Like you can't look in a mirror, so you just don't care.
You gotta wait for somebody to make a painting of you.
There's another great vampire story there. The vampire that thinks he looks like Kiefer Sutherland, but he actually does look like Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, and vampires, some of these talking about like Lestat and some of these snarky vampires and stuff, they give each other feedback and they're like, oh man, no, you look great.
There's a great British 90s vampire series that lasted, it's only like 8 episodes or something. They just did one series, and then the guy who made it said in an interview afterwards that making it was a lot more intense than he had expected, because he had expected to kind of make a dumb actiony take on things, and instead he got a really serious drama. It was like, I don't know, it's pretty heavy, but it's called Ultraviolet. It's actually about a team of vampire hunters. It's 8 episodes about vampires in which they never use the word vampire. And it's beautiful. It's wonderfully filmed. It stars a million people that you've seen in other things. It's the first place I ever saw Idris Elba, for instance. And it's about vampires that are genuinely terrifying. And there's a really complicated like plan that they are executing in the background that they realize they're having to combat, to try to push back against. But there is so much in it about the difficulty. In their mythology, vampires basically cannot be detected by any technology. So like they can't pick up a telephone and use it. They could dial the number, but the person on the other end won't hear what they say, because the machines refuse to transmit them, basically.
Wow.
And there's so much in them, in that series, about like little ways they try to accommodate, down to like trying to find people who kind of look like them, so that they can kind of see what they look like, and having like special keyboards that they can type on and get a computer voice to say what they want over a telephone. All kinds of weird, fun stuff. But, coming from that angle of like, they don't really interact with the modern world very well. They really do a fun job of extending that.
I'd forgotten about that series. It's been a long time since I revisited that one. That
I've never
was
heard
pretty solid. Yeah, don't confuse it with the Mila Jovovich movie. That's not the same thing at all.
It's great, but different things.
Is it streaming anywhere?
Hmm?
Do you know if it's streaming anywhere?
I don't know. I bought the DVDs years ago after finding out that they existed when I was done to find out that I could order the DVDs of it. It played one Sunday afternoon, every episode all in a row on Sci-Fi Channel in like 1998, and I happened to catch it and just like sat there just obsessed in front of the TV for the entire day. And ever since, it has been my favorite vampire fiction in any way set to film.
Wow.
Apparently it's on Tubi. I'll have to check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Highly recommended.
Amazon
Great
also
stuff.
has it.
Yeah, thanks for doing
Amazon
the digging there. Again, no pun intended, but
Intend the pun.
I intended. Yes, claim
Embrace
it.
it. Embrace the pun.
I wanted to make a transition since we were talking about female vampires and maybe use Once Bitten as a good transition into comedy. There's been so many great, not serious vampire movies. What are your favorites?
Well, the most recent one, What We Do in the Shadows, which is now an incredible series. I mean, that I was skeptical because, as you point, like there's not a lot of great vampire comedies out there, and so I've been burned way too many times. And sometimes I take my vampires a little too seriously. Like sometimes the joke doesn't land with me because I'm like, no. But man, What We Do in the Shadows, the movie got it so right. I was howling within 5 minutes, and I didn't stop. Like that is, and it's not just one type of vampire. Like they, they know. Like I can't. I think I'm trying to remember the guy's name who directed and wrote it.
Taika Waititi.
Yeah, Taika, right? Like he really recently, like he loves it. You could tell he loves vampires, and there's all these like different like versions of them. We get the Orlok version, and we get the, I mean, it's really wonderful. I think it's the best comedy for vampire lovers.
I've been meaning to watch that. I wanted to watch the movie first, and it went off of the streaming platform that I had. And I know that I understand that the movie and the TV series aren't really related, so I could watch the TV series, but
you could absolutely watch the TV show without having seen the movie. The TV show happens in the same world as the movie, but you don't need the events of the movie to understand it. They're just sort of connected by like the same general concept of why you're able to see what's happening.
The clips I've seen have been fantastic.
Oh, it's so good. It's one of the few things where I actually think the TV show has long exceeded the movie. I think the TV show is like way better. I love the movie. I went to see the movie multiple times in the theater, and I think that the TV show is even better.
Right, picking up with adding an energy vampire, right, to the TV series. I don't think there was one in the movie, right?
I don't think so.
So funny. One of my favorite TV characters of all time.
Mm-hmm.
It's got my favorite gag of all time, where they're all standing outside the club and they can't get in because they haven't been invited. It's just so hilarious. Like it's such a great visual gag, and it's just like they're all just kind of like hoping, they're trying to get someone to invite them in, like kids in front of a liquor store trying to get someone to buy for them. Like it's just so hilarious. I love it.
I think my favorite vampire comedy might be Love at First Bite. I was
going to say that.
What We Do in the Shadows. But yeah, I love Love at First Bite. Just Renfield trying to get the casket through like the airport security. Like that, as a child, I watched it on TV. It was another thing that just blew my mind. I didn't get a ton of it because I hadn't read Dracula yet at the point that I watched it. But so much of it is so funny.
Yep. And it still stands up. It's still funny. And we can't forget Mel Brooks as Dracula Dead and Loving It.
That's right. That's what I was going to throw out. Leslie Nielsen, right? So good. So the comedy vampires and stuff. Are there any types of comedy you want to see? Like you said, Mike, that there aren't a lot of really good ones. What are we doing wrong? What
Well, I mean,
what's the next
it,
like What We Do in the Shadows? Or
I mean, it's well, I mean, phew, you know, I mean, that's a hard one to grasp because it's you know, I think there's like Buffy is fun, right? It's a comedy, there's comedic moments, but like the show anyway, when they need to be serious, they need to be serious, they are serious. And I think any vampire comedy, I think, has to have that edge to it, or else I just can't. Because I think we went through a lot, like growing up. By the time, like in the late 60s, 70s, when I was growing up, vampires were a joke. There wasn't like really serious, scary vampires out there. It was like the stuff we saw in Creature Double Feature, the old 30s movies and 40s movies and whatnot. But there wasn't anything that was really like, the only things that were being brought to the screen were things like Count Yorga and Blackula. Like they were comedies, like they were satires of, and they're not very scary in and of themselves. We were seeing them on TV, everything like that. Like even the Frank Langella wasn't really like scary, it's more romantic. And I think a vampire, a really good vampire story, whether it's a comedy or whatever, really has to have like that sort of serious edge to it, or else for me it falls flat.
well, what I'd like to see, maybe with a little bit of the humor of True Blood, with post-apocalyptic, and so many of the blood bags, humans have been actually eradicated, and now vampires, like you need, instead of all these overpopulation, motifs and stories that you see in movies, well, what if most of the Earth's population of living humans are gone, and now the vampires, maybe they have a council or something, and they've got to get the humans to procreate some more so they can actually have some food, and then comedy ensues.
That brings me to the idea of, I really would love for someone to do a good adaptation of I Am Legend.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes,
I can
please.
never decide if it's a vampire or a zombie film because the monsters are kind of both.
Yeah, you think like three times, right? And Last Man on Earth is, I mean, it's Vincent Price. Not going to say anything bad about that. Charlton
Right.
Heston one is a little bit too over the top, and then
Mega
I
Man.
was really disappointed in the Will Smith one. So yes, that's another one that I would love to see really done well.
And it's not like it's a complicated narrative. It's like you could literally just film the book.
I think that for me, one of the things about horror comedies is horror and comedy both functionally, they both turn on the same hinge. They both operate on the basis of subverted expectation. And so if a horror comedy is going to work, then you've got to have both kinds of subverted expectation in the story. It's like you said, Mike, you've got to have that edge. It has to be possible for really terrible things to happen to people. And that's so that when instead of what comes out of the end of the gun is a flag that says bang instead of a silver bullet, that's so that when it's funny, when it's comedy, that's an even bigger relief, and the comedy is even funnier when that happens. And I think that's a balance that people are not great at getting. I think especially we're living in a very fortunate moment in terms of being horror fans and getting to enjoy like really complex stories and really great filmmaking and like really advanced storytelling within genre, which like for a long time just was not what people were going for. They wanted shock. They didn't want big complicated narratives and really dense story as horror. And I think that's part of why things like What We Do in the Shadows is possible now, but probably would not have been possible 30 years ago. In its own way, Near Dark was a surprise because it presents a really complicated, very human drama about basically intergenerational conflict and the culture wars before we were calling them the culture wars. And it wraps it up in this like shock value genre cloak of being a vampire movie. And I think that only now that we have people who are like really interested in digging into the media that are available to us and seeing like, what can I do with a TV show? What can I do with a movie that nobody has done before? They're discovering that one of the things they've never done before, or at least not often done before, is have really dense, powerful storytelling in genre.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes it's just dialed in and you go for the easy, low hanging fruit. And like I talked about on some other panels, like, okay, Jurassic Park, like eventually it's just going to be dinosaurs in space. Like it's got to eventually get to space.
Yeah.
And which actually I was just watching Life Force the other day, where the vampires in space,
Yep. Planet of the Vampires. Yeah, they've done that. They've gone to space.
I don't know that one.
Oh, Planet of the Vampires is pretty solid. It's a fun movie. It's a like 60s, I think. I'd have to look, but sorry. But yeah, that's a fun one too. I don't know if I would put it as a comedy or necessarily make it as a comedy. And certainly I think it would have comedic elements to it, but I've been thinking this whole time. I love it when we do these panels, especially with other writers and everything, because I get, inspired. And this discussion has inspired me. And I would love to see a older vampire movie, in as a reaction to all the younger kid ones we get. Something in the vein of I don't know if you guys have seen the Ian McKellen Mr. Holmes movie that came out a few years ago, like something like that, but with an older vampire, sort of reflecting on what it means to have lived that long.
Unintended.
Yeah, pun intended. I would love to see something like that, especially an actor like Ian or Patrick Stewart, or like there's so many great older actors out there that could really tackle this and have fun with it. I think that would be kind of fun.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you have vampire. I'm trying to think. Well, you've got like Charles Dance in the Underworld movies.
Oh yeah,
as like an older, like physically older vampire. But yeah, you don't see that very often. I mean, besides, of course, I almost said Frank Drebin as Leslie Nielsen.
Well, there is a movie called Old Dracula, which features David Niven as Dracula, and he's up there in age at the time. It's not very good. It's supposed to be a comedy, and it's not great. So I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. But I mean, it's not like it's completely untapped. But I think if it was done, like I said, in the vein of something like Mr. Holmes, I think it could be really interesting to explore that.
It would be cool. Now you got me thinking about it too. It's like an older vampire who's been around for thousands of years, and he was made a vampire when he was an older human, which means he still has that fucking bad hip. Hasn't gotten any worse, but going upstairs is still a pain in the ass for him. But you could do something like that, but also scary and serious.
Well, like Charlene Harris, right, in was it Dead in Dallas with Elvis, the bodyguard, so the True Blood series. Her bodyguard which I hated that it didn't make it into this TV series with Elvis, never died. There was a vampire that was the doctor on the operating table, and he bit him and kept him alive. But he's all the way that alcohol and drugs and living his life of excess ravaged his body didn't revert back. So he's just like basically brain dead, and says very few words in the novels. It's great. That's one of my favorite vampire novel characters, basically. So y'all brought us some really good points. I'm curious, which thing can anyone play, let's say, Dracula?
No.
Or what's
no, I've seen, unfortunately, you have to be a certain special someone to play Dracula. I mean, Dracula is the king of the Lord of vampires, the king of the undead. He's it. So you have to have charisma, you have to have intensity. even if you're doing it comedically, you have to like. There's been so many times where I've seen Dracula depicted, and I'm like, it's just not. Whether it's Blade 3, one of the many problems with that movie, or even Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I mean, as good as that show was, they got Dracula completely wrong. So if you introduce him, you better bring it, I think.
I thought Oldman did a fantastic, in an otherwise problematic production. I thought Oldman did a really good Dracula.
I think so too.
And I actually think that Frank Langella's Dracula is a great take on Dracula. The way that the musical modified the storyline so that the movie adaptation of it is like very weird compared to the book, that threw me off. But his performance of Dracula I thought was great. He gets the charismatic Dracula. He gets the kind of Dracula that people do want to meet, I will say.
The one that surprised me the most was Jack Palance's Dracula. Like, I thought, oh man, this is going to be rough. Like, I couldn't, like, the guy from City Slickers, really. But I watched that, and his performance, he was probably the most violent and quick to rage Dracula that I've ever seen depicted. And so intense that, I mean, it was a completely different take on Dracula, obviously. But it worked so well. This was not your romantic Louis Jourdan, Frank Langella kind of guy, right? Like this was a guy who would like really like mess you up. Yeah. So I don't. Yeah. I mean,
tell everybody what film that was. I'm not familiar with it.
I think it's just called Dracula. I think it was a TV series or something. I don't know. It was a. Yeah, it's just called Dracula. It's just another adaptation of Dracula with Jack Palance in it. And of course Christopher Lee and Bella set the tone for almost everybody, right? Like, I don't think I can't fault either one of them. They both did amazing jobs. I mean, I can't imagine Dracula without those guys.
I really enjoyed, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Claes Bang, who was Dracula in the Netflix, like 3-episode Stephen Moffat.
Oh yeah.
Stephen Moffat.
Yeah.
I really loved the first 2 episodes. The third episode where they brought it into the present day kind of lost me, but even in that one, he did a fantastic Dracula, I thought. Because you could see both charming and you could see creepy all at the same time.
Yeah, he had a little bit of attitude. I like that you didn't see in a little bit of that kind of Holmesian banter, and super intelligence that just kind of cat and mouse kind of stuff that I don't know you really get from the text, the Stoker text, but it was a really cool adaptation. I agree. And at first I wasn't really sold on his look, but yeah, the actor did a great performance.
Yeah. And Raul Julia's Broadway performance is renowned as one of the great depictions, but as far as I know, there's not a filmed version of it. So I've never seen it. I think that to capture Dracula, I think anybody could play Dracula as long as they have the following features. They have to have unbelievably smoldering eyes. They have to basically be a trained dancer, because there has to be like that feline physicality to it. And I think that they have to be gifted. It would help if they have done really gifted comedy work, because comedians who understand, like comedy actors who understand timing, are great in horror. It's, there's every time you see like a famous comedic actor show up in horror, it's going to be good. And so I think that like a lot of potential actors could do it. And otherwise, I don't think that any other features particularly matter. I think that they just have to be able to have that presence physically, and they have to be able to have that presence or that control rather over their own performance, because they have to give a really controlled performance while really filling the screen with that physicality. There are a ton of people I would love to see play Dracula, and they might be people that are considered unconventional for the role or whatever. But I would love to, speaking of Idris Elba, I would love to see Idris Elba play Dracula because he's got the physicality. He has those eyes.
Yes.
Absolutely terrify, and he could absolutely entice. So, you know, I think that like there are a lot of possible actors out there. You know, I can think of a number of women that I think would make great actors portraying Dracula in an adaptation of Dracula in which it's the Countess instead of the Count for whatever reason, you know.
Well, we've seen, I was gonna say, we've seen Tilda Swinton already play a vampire, right? But in what's it called? The with
The one with Tom
Tenant?
Hiddleston.
Is that what it,
Yeah, Only Lovers Left Alive.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
So
really
good.
great. That's a great movie too. I mean,
And
ooh,
it-
two great actors.
And in its own way, The Hunger is, it's not exactly an adaptation of Dracula, but Catherine Deneuve does kind of play that same like powerful and mysterious and alluring figure who is capable of like drawing someone into their world in the same way that Dracula, his power is that he is alluring and he can draw people into his world. He can convince people to do what he wants them to do.
Mm.
Well, I know it sucks, but we're almost out of time.
He intended that pun.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. Said no vampire ever. So, any last words for our audience about the great conversation, and any final words about the evolution of the cinema vampire?
It's been fun, and I look forward to seeing more. Like they're just
it up.
like it's just a fun. It's not really a genre. It's kind of hard to like, but because it supersedes genres. You can do anything with a vampire. You can put him in a Western. You could put him in a superhero movie. You could do whatever you want with a vampire. And I'm keen to see what's next for vampires.
Same.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to give you a chance now to tell everybody at home where they can find you online, your social media, and anything else you've got going on right now. Lev, why don't you start?
You can find me on Facebook and leverettbutts.com, and you can find my books on Amazon. Guns of the Wasteland, King Arthur is a Western.
Excellent.
Nice.
Mike or Michael or Michael?
You have to specify.
I know,
Mr. Williams.
Thank you. You can find me at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook as at McManlyPants, as if we were, you know, the Manly Pantses of Scotland. And you can also find me as on Facebook as Michael G. Williams Author, where M, G, W, and A are all uppercase. And you can also find me on Amazon and at Falstaff Books because they're my publisher. They publish my vampire series, The Withrow Chronicles. They publish my sci-fi noir series that starts with A Fallen Autumn. And they publish my time travel urban fantasy series set in San Francisco that starts with Through the Doors of Oblivion.
And Mr. Gordon.
Thanks a lot. You can find most of, if you want to look at tikizombie.net or New Legend Michael talk all about, or that's where you can find all my writing and books information on that. As far as the podcast, earthstation1.com, esonetwork.com. We're doing our countdown to Halloween episodes. So there's going to be 3 this month because unfortunately Black Adam cuts the last week out of the Halloween picture for us, reviewing that. But we've got coming up this week, we're looking at the Monsters, not just the new movie, but the whole franchise. Then we're celebrating, the week after that, we're celebrating the 100 years of Nosferatu. And then the week after that, we are celebrating 60 years of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. So it's going to be a lot of fun coming up on Earth Station 1. So I hope everybody can join us there.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. And I'm, again, Kyle Mitchell. If you want to check me out, I'm at Poet Kyle on social media. I'm a poet. I have some books of poetry out there if you want to Google me and find me there. And this conversation has got me inspired to write some horror poetry, especially a vampire poem, maybe in the month of October. So if I can just get some time, I'm
Do it.
psyched to, yeah. And I will gratefully, they say good artists borrow and great artists steal. So I'm gonna steal all of the ideas from this panel for some poetry. Thank you guys, and thanks everybody at home for watching our panel today.